What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to Nightmare Success In and Out Podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with. We're going to be talking about life before prison, life in prison, and life out of prison. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that will help you knock down some of the prisons you've built up in your own mind. Folks, today my guest is Paul Hartfield. Paul, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So I was going to say Paul has a book, and for those watching on YouTube, it's called For Such a Time as This. And I believe, Paul, did it just come out?
It's been out about a year,
okay.
Maybe a little long, year and a half, something like that.
Okay, so it's fairly new.
Fairly new, yes.
Okay. Well, Paul, one of the things I remember about you is we were lucky enough to have our family come to see us, and I got to see your family, and you got to see my family in the visiting room. And the other thing that really sticks in my mind is that you were a good singer, and I remember particularly the one Easter. And it was really unusual because they actually allowed the inmates to invite their family and walk through the hallway into the gymnasium, which was really, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but for us who were actually inmates, for our families to enter the area that we were living was unusual. I mean, it was a real eye-opener for my family to be able to walk down that hallway. They couldn't see down where the A and B and D or C and D dorms, but it was still an experience. And that day, and my family was there, and it was an Easter service, and you and your son got the opportunity to be up and entertained us with your singing. It was fantastic.
Well, thank you. That was an interesting time. In fact, that was the first time, and I was told the first time in 16 years they've allowed inmates' families to enter the gymnasium there to have a service. They used to do it, I understand, years and years and years ago sometimes, but that was the first time in over 15 years. It was put together by myself and a couple of inmates who we rallied the warden to try and do that. We thought it was good, and the chaplain got behind it, and pretty soon it became a reality.
And it was really something. When something like that happens in prison, it's a big deal because it's hard to get anything accomplished like that in prison. I mean, it's not something you go and say, hey, what about this? This is a good idea, right?
Absolutely. We had to submit a number of written requests. We had to meet. We actually had to visit with the warden because he didn't want any trouble, of course. Mm-hmm. And you're right. It takes a long time to get something like that accomplished. Yeah,
and I remember when we were all getting ready to go into the gymnasium, there was a lady out there, and I can't remember what her name was, but she was trying to, the wind was blowing that day. It was April, and some days can be warmer than others. That one happened to be a little colder, and we were all kind of huddled up, getting ready to go in there, and she was trying to break up all the families. You can't touch, you can't hug, can't do. I was like, oh my gosh, we're at Easter here.
Yeah, I do recall that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Paul, take us back a little bit. Where did you grow up? Your family, siblings? What was Paul doing back at a young age?
Well, I was born and grew up in Texas.
Okay.
Grew up in the eastern part of Texas, a little north of Houston. And I never left the state till I was 18 years old. So, it was a different upbringing for me than maybe a lot of people. I loved music, became a professional musician, and for 26 years I was a professional singer of symphonic, opera, and oratorio pieces. And so it was, it was a different type of life. But what happened was I really, really look back on those days as wonderful days. I grew up in the South. It's a little simpler than what it is today.
Yeah. Well, usually they don't let those Texans leave. Once you're there,
no.
you can't cross the borders.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. But I did get away. And when I met my wife, when I went to graduate school in Kansas City, I met my wife to be. And when we got married, we thought the Midwest was a really wonderful place to raise a family, and so we just stayed in the Midwest.
So did your mom and dad, you had brothers and sisters?
I do. I have two brothers and one sister.
Okay, and did they stay in Texas and you moved to the Midwest, or how did that work?
They have never left the state either. All three of them still live there, and they've never left the state.
That's great. That's great. So when you were, did you tour when you were doing this with the music?
I did. I did a lot of things around the U.S. Most of my stuff was in Europe and abroad. I was much younger then, so I did a lot of traveling. In fact, when I retired from that, I retired because I still had young children at home, and I was getting tired of being away from them for so long. So it was more or less a tour. It's more or less kind of like an independent contractor.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
So your kids, did the kids' wife, did they travel with you, or how did that work when you do that type of stuff on the road?
Occasionally, we would travel together. I remember when my first child was born, my daughter Maria. I was making my European debut in Paris, France, and I was so torn up about being away from them because it was a 3-month-long contract. And so I flew them over, and they spent a month with me, which was great because I was really
homesick.
Difficult to be away from your family. Yeah, homesick and difficult to be away from them at that time period. But, later on, my wife would travel. We went to Hong Kong together. We went to Barcelona, Spain together. So I took her as much as I could, but we have 3 children, and they were a handful.
Well, and you, I mean, in a job like that, I mean, the perk benefit with it, you got to see the world.
I did. A lot of people wait till they retire, they go to see the world. Well, I saw all the world by the time I was 30. And so there's, I think I've never been to Australia, but I've been almost everywhere else. Africa, Europe, the Far East, the Middle East, everywhere you can imagine.
What was your favorite?
Well, a lot of people ask me that, and I'd have to say my favorite place to go still to this day was Cape Town, South Africa.
Wow, okay.
I thought it was one of the great universal cities that we never hear about because it's just so far away.
Right.
But it was a wonderful experience. It had mountains on one side and an ocean on the other, so it was just a great experience.
So, Paul, when you retired out of that music world, what did you do after that? What was your business world?
Well, I was looking for something I could do. I didn't have many skills other than music, but if you remember in the early 2000s, real estate was a hot market.
Oh yeah.
And so I began to look into that, and I started a company where we purchased single-family homes, rehabilitated them, then resold them.
Okay.
And it really took off. I was shocked because I didn't know that much, but as I learned and went through this, you learn a lot. And so by the time we got to 2006, we had about 350 single-family homes that we owned.
Wow. That sounds like a lot.
It was a lot.
Trial by fire. I mean, you must have figured it out while you were walking through it.
Well, I didn't figure out everything, as you already know.
Well, sometimes that can happen, though. I mean, I always say, and I was giving a speech the other day to a college group, and I said, one of the things about growing, we went from 3 states to 22 states, is that when things are really good, you can kind of take your eye off the ball and get lazy and hit a blind spot. And, that's when things surprise you, and then you've got to handle things as they come at you. And sometimes it feels like an avalanche.
I think that is probably so very true. So very true. You get successful and you begin to get a little lackadaisical about what you're doing, and anything can happen.
Yeah. So tell me, what did happen, Paul? How did it? Because it's, for those who don't know Paul, he's a very nice man, and he's a kind of a gentle soul. So it's always interesting with all these different stories how people end up where they end up. So Paul, where did it start, and how did the nightmare begin for you?
Well, as I said, we were doing really quite well with the real estate company. We were successful enough that we even opened up our own mortgage company at the same time. So we were buying selling, and so forth. And then about 2007, as you know, we began to have difficulties because the real estate market or real estate bubble burst, shall we say, and everyone was beginning to struggle, and we were no different. We began to have problems with cash flow. We began to struggle with a number of properties. Nothing would sell, so we had to go into a defensive mode of renting or leasing. And that was always difficult because when your renter or leaser leaves, you really have to go back in and redo it again.
Right.
So you're spending money there. So at about 2007, it was coming down fast, and our multi-million-dollar company dwindled to less than $100,000 in about 3 to 4 weeks.
Wow.
And so we were struggling. We decided we just could not go, so we closed the company. Shortly after that, I had a heart attack in April of 2008. It was probably more stress related.
That's what I was going to say. That was probably a stress heart attack.
Yeah, it was horrible. I mean, and I was arriving at church one day, and I opened the door to my car, and it was just a strange feeling in my chest. And thank goodness there was a good friend of mine that drove up at the same time, and he would not let me go in the church unless we went and had it checked out. It was a good thing because it was it required that I have a number of stents put in. So that was kind of going that way. And, you probably understand this, Brent. When that happens to you and your business falls apart, you become very depressed and very just your anxiety level is very high. You're you can't really deal with things very well.
Yep.
And so I was struggling very much so. But, after a while, you get past that, and even though everything has failed, you've just got nothing that works or anything like that. You feel like things are doing well. And then one Tuesday morning, at about 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang, and I went down and answered it. And a very lovely lady and a gentleman introduced themselves as agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mm. And I said, how may I help you? And they said, well, we'd like to see some of the records of your company that failed. We have some things that are not quite exactly the way we feel like they should be. I naively thought, well, okay, that's no problem. I have nothing to hide. So I asked them to allow me to finish getting dressed, and I would meet them at my office, and we could go through anything I want to. And that was the beginning of sorrows, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Did you call an attorney at the time, Paul, or did you just go let them in?
I just let them in because I was naive at the time. Yeah. I'd never been in trouble, so I thought, I got nothing to hide.
Show them what they want to see, right?
That's what I thought. Yeah, let them see what they want to see. Well, I should have known that they don't start looking at you unless they're looking for something to find fault in you, and I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, then they come back and said, well, we need to see things. And by that time, I talked to some people, and I asked them if it was okay if I have my attorney present. They didn't like that, of course, and said that they would just subpoena the rest of them, which they did. They subpoenaed the rest of the records. So, as you're probably aware to talk with others, the difficult time of going to prison is not when you get to prison, but from when they indict you to the time you get to prison, which for me was a little over 2 years.
Yeah.
And so it's 2 of the worst years of my life. And so one thing left to another, and the prosecutor began to suggest, he says, well, I think you committed some act of bank fraud and money laundering. I had to ask him what money laundering was. I mean, you talk about being a real naive person. I wasn't even certain what that was. And when he described it to me, I said, well, we do deposit checks that we get into our account. And he says, well, that's all it takes. Shortly after that, they come back and said, we're going to indict you, for that. And of course, I hired attorneys, and I was prepared to go the distance because I didn't think I had done anything wrong. Now, after it was described to me what we did, which was everyday business use, by their definition, it was wrong.
Right.
And so I had to come to those terms, but I was prepared to go the distance with them. And so they came to me with an offer and said, if you will say you did this, we will give you this, this, and this. And I said, I'm not comfortable with that. I think I would rather just take my chances in court. They said, well, if you go to court and lose, which 92% of them do lose,
right.
He said, you're going to get this, this, and this, which is considerably more. But I really felt strong about that. And so we were preparing to go to court, and then they called me in one last time, and they said, well, we need you to reconsider this, and you need to take this. It's an open and shut case for us, and if you don't, we will destroy you when it's over with. And I said, well, I'm prepared for that chance. They said, well, if you do not take this last offer we're going to give you, says we will indict your wife.
Mm.
And at that point, I felt like I could not take a chance, even though she was never involved in our business. She never knew anything about what was going on. I didn't want to take any chance of bringing her into that type of situation.
And Paul, that's such a strong thing that they have in their playbook, and they use it well. People say, well, how does 97% of the people that get indicted plea? When they start stretching into family, a lot of times that's the folding mechanism. And I know so many people I've talked to that was one of the things that happened. And that's a tough one, because you have to struggle with what you're dealing with, and then once you know that somebody else is going to get entangled in it, you don't want that for their world.
Yeah, well, it stopped me in my tracks.
Yep.
There's no question. And I said, well, I don't want to agree that I've committed the crime. I said, how about if I agree that I committed the crime of conspiracy to commit? And they agreed with that. They said, that's fine with us as long as you take this. So I had to go up, and I had to stand before the judge and say, yes, I did this. Yes, I did that. And it was very difficult because I had not done that. But I could not possibly take a chance of my wife getting drug into something that who knows what they could turn it into. And,
well, Paul, speaking of your wife and kids in those 2 years, how did you guys get through that? I mean, I know I went through that with my kids and wife. How did the family survive?
Well, as I said earlier, Brandon, it's really, and you know this, of course, the time between your dying and the time between you are actually right in prison is the most difficult time. Prison's simple and easy. Mm-hmm. But it was very difficult because I started going through my depression again. I couldn't hardly function. It's hard for me to get up. My wife was very concerned. We always had a very strong family, but I will say, even when this trouble happened, it solidified us even more. My two sons and my daughter became great patriots to surround the flag, shall we say. Mm-hmm. And they were always there I told them that I was going to have to go away, and that they had to take care of their mother some way, and they stepped up. So that was great, but it was probably the most agonizing time that I know in my 66 years.
Yeah. How old were your kids at that point?
Well, two of them were out of the house, but I still had Robert, the singer, mm-hmm. that you heard, and he was still in high school.
Okay.
And they were good. I have to admit, it was the most difficult thing for me to bring them into the bedroom one day and explain to them this is what's going to happen and so forth. And I thought I would lose them forever, but instead they stayed not only strong through it, but even stronger than it was before. Mm-hmm. So I'm very thankful and feel very blessed about that.
Yeah. No, that's, I think it's such a big deal to have your family muscle up together and get through something that's, a storm. And when you do that, I think it does make the ties the bonds that much stronger, because, when somebody goes to prison, the family goes to prison, and you're
very much so.
The whole family's dealing with it and dealing with whatever the outside is. You're on the inside, and, you feel emasculated because you can't help them on the outside. So it's a struggle, but it's, there's so much gratitude in the fact that you have a family. Paul, you and I both know so many of the guys that we were with, we saw families disintegrate, or, somebody would show up with divorce papers, and man, what a dark place to get bad news.
Sure. I saw that happen a number of times. You're right. Yeah. It's horrible. It's a very horrible thing.
So Paul, what was the final deal that they gave you?
Well, as I said, I had to agree to it, and it was 78 months, 78-month sentence, and they wanted me to pay back like $2.4 million of restitution, and I would agree that I would sign an agreement saying that I would never do anything in the real estate profession again. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't ever planning to, but what I thought would happen, as you know, they they many times judge our sentence on the loss
Right.
amount. And so what I was hoping we could do is when we got to the sentencing, we could debate or argue the loss and get it down, that they went with the prosecutor all the way across. So, I knew it was going to happen, and I was prepared. They were very, very understanding to the point that they let me self-surrender. And I'm assuming you've talked about that on your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's a blessing because you're able to kind of prepare, get everything together before you leave to go.
Yeah. And it's a weird time period when, that time that you've actually pled to the time that you find in the mailbox where you're going to go. You've got time to think about that. And then you've got, that day, that time that you have to stand in front of that gate. What was going through your mind?
Well, I was very down about it. It was, my first assignment was the federal prison camp in Duluth, Minnesota. And
Sounds
my wife,
cold.
It was because I had
Texas
to go.
boy.
Yeah, I had to go on December 27th.
Oh.
And there were mountains and mountains of snow everywhere. My wife drove me. I told her I wanted to just take a bus and go there by myself. She would have no part of that. She said, "No, I'm going to take you." And then she did, and it was hard for her to drop me off. I knew it would just destroy her, but she did, and I went in and went through the procedure, of being accepted, shall we say, or processed,
yeah,
into the prison system. And by the time I was done, it was nighttime, and I walked out. And Minnesota, you're right, is a cold, cold place. I think that night it was like 12 below or something, super cold. And I was very, very just thinking of ways that, is there some way I could off myself or something to get out of this misery, because it's just not something I'll be able to handle for 5 or 6 years, whatever I have to go. And then I saw out of the corner of my eye, as I stand outside, a person walking up to me, an inmate. And I thought, well, this is my first test. I better be ready to defend myself here. And he introduced himself, and he said, "My name's Jeff." He said, "I was just headed over to the chapel for the 7 o'clock Bible study. Would you like to come?" And it was like a burden had been lifted off of me. And I told him I would love to go. And so that was my first night there. It really put me at ease when he did that. And I was so thankful that he came up and asked for me to do that.
Paul, I think that's one of the things that, people see stuff on TV and they try to, because it gets good ratings of violence and all those different things. But I think one of the things that surprised me, just as you, is that first night, that first day of how many different people want to help you. They know that because they've done it themselves, and they want to give you that helping hand to get you transitioned into this unfamiliar world. And man, do you appreciate that? Because it does. It kind of just steadies you, and your mind just shifts gears down to the low gear. It calms down a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
No, you're exactly right. It's I think that's the shock that you receive. I think you go in there and you expect to see all these type of prison guys like what you see on TV, and many of them, are just men that made a mistake and are trying to get home. I can still remember the day I met you for the first time.
Yeah.
And I thought, when I went away, I said, "Well, this seems like a nice guy. What in the world is he doing here?" And I said about so many, and so people ask me today, say, "Well, what are the people like in prison?" And I said, "Well, there's two types of people. There's the kind you meet and you say, 'What are you doing here? You don't belong here. You should be at home or something.' And then there's another kind you meet. You think, 'What are you doing here? You should be locked in a cage and the key thrown away.'" There's two type of differences that you meet. But I met so many people who were just regular people, and they made a mistake, or maybe they didn't even make a mistake, but yet were convicted anyway.
Right.
And they all had a good attitude that they were going to try and get through and get home back to their family.
So being that far away, Paul, how did that work with you and your family? Because that's not a close, I think you're supposed to be within 500 miles.
That's right. But I was a little over 600 away. It was difficult. I mean, I only got to see my wife and my children about once every month and a half. And so and it was also very expensive because you just couldn't drive up there and see me and drive back. It's a 10-hour drive up there, 10-hour drive back. So when they'd come for a weekend, time they did hotel, food, and stuff like that, they've spent over $1,000, and it was expensive. We left being a 2-income family now to 1 income, so they had to watch their dollars, and every month and a half wasn't doing it for me. That's when I got to the point. After about a year, I said, I've got to try and see if I can get closer to home. So I went to the warden, who was a very understanding man, and I said, look, I'm over 600 nautical miles from home. Is there any possible way I could transfer just to get closer? And he understood. He was reluctant because it's so cold there, nobody transfers in.
Right.
Once you're sent there, once you sent there, you're usually there.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'll look into it. And I guess it wasn't 3, maybe 4 weeks after that, I hear a call over the PA system for my name to go to the secretary's office. And when I went in, they said, your transfer has been approved. And I asked where, because they were saying it might be in Oklahoma, it might be in Indiana, just as long as you're within 500 miles. Mm-hmm. And they said, where you requested? Leavenworth. And the greatest part of it was they said, how would you like to go? Which shocked me because I thought, do I have a choice? They said, yes, we can give you a bus ticket and you can go there, or you can have, if you're married, you can have your wife come and pick you up. And to me, that was a joy beyond compare.
Oh my gosh.
And, yeah. So she
and how long had you been in? About a year?
I've been in there 14 months.
Okay.
Yeah, and they usually don't let you out until about after 16 months. Mm-hmm. But I got lucky, I guess. You know me, I never got in a lot of trouble or anything like that. So so I was pretty boring. And I think the warden, who he had heard me sing a couple times too, I think he kind of felt, well, we need to help this guy out, and I appreciate him doing that. So my wife came and picked me up. We had 11 hours to get from Duluth to Leavenworth, and we had to, we got to have a great meal. Rest of our family met us there. You remember that restaurant directly across from the camp there?
I sure do. It was the little house from across the street from the big house is what they had on the side.
That's it, yeah. They have a wonderful steak dinner there and so forth, and we don't get to eat steak too many times in the prison system. So my family and I, we met there at about 5, a little before 5. We had a nice dinner together, and then she dropped me off in front of the big house, and they processed me, and I stayed in the hole that night. And then the counselor came and picked me up the next morning, take me over to camp.
So, Paul, what was, going from prison to prison, and then you're at Leavenworth. So the good part is that you're right next to home. I don't know what Duluth was like, but I know what Leavenworth was like. What was your opinion of everything, getting into the system and getting processed through and being in the hole? And
well, they were really very different. Duluth is a standalone camp. It does not have a larger house. It's not a satellite. It's situated at an old Air Force base. So you've got things in Duluth that you don't have there in Leavenworth, because that's really a satellite camp and so forth. I mean, we had a full-size chapel. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was a full-size church, seated over 300 people. We had a big theater that you can go watch your movies in and so forth. I mean, it was just, it was different. And it also, there were over 900 men when I was there. Mm. And then the transfer down to a place that had about 300 or a little over 300 was a lot different. And being a satellite camp was really different too. Mm-hmm. The dormitories in Duluth were much better, but like I said, that was an old Air Force base. Right. So of course, it would be better and everything. I was particularly amazed when I got to Leavenworth, the dormitory system. We had an open dormitory. And then if you were really good, you could go down to a 2-man. Yeah,
they called that the suburbs.
Yeah. So that was kind of interesting. But it was quite different. There seemed to be a lot more of mine and your type of prisoner, the white collar people in Duluth, than there was in Leavenworth. Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to think, what was your job? I can't remember, Paul, what you did at Leavenworth. I remember you in the chapel and all that.
Well, I worked for Unicorps for a long time.
That's right.
But it got a little I don't know, I needed a change or something like that. And so,
well, for those who don't know what Unicor is, it's really kind of like a factory where they take parts, or they take things out of federal buildings and they take them apart and sell the parts off. But it's almost kind of like an assembly line, factory line of prisoners and inmates doing the disassembling things, right?
yeah, verbatim, almost verbatim. That's exactly what it is. It's like a factory. Then after a while, my roommate, Ron Slovacek, asked me if I would come out and work with him. He says, they're looking for somebody. Would you work with me out at the fort? And I said, sure, why not? And so I went to the entomology department there at Fort Leavenworth. And that was really a fun time, too. I think you worked at the golf course.
I did, yeah.
And so forth. And it was good to kind of get away, wasn't it, sometimes?
Well, it was a huge thing. And I think... for us that had been confined and being able to get community custody and actually get a taste of seeing people out and about and feeling that. And then what was kind of strange to me is that, we'd go over there and then at 3:30 we'd go back to prison.
Yeah, it was a strange feeling, wasn't it?
It was.
But you really enjoyed that time being away from prison.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I never could quite figure out why there were two types of prisoners. There were the ones that wanted to get a good job and keep themselves busy and not lose themselves, try to keep being themselves. And then there were the other guys that really just got lost in the system and really became more institutionalized into their bad, ugly routines and stayed in that fenced-in area and never left. And there really just were two kinds. There were those that were trying to work and keep busy, and then there are other kinds that really slipped into a black hole.
Yeah, there wasn't much of a middle class. It was either this or that.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. And that's I think the biggest shock I had in prison was locating that type of philosophy between certain people.
Yeah. Well, I know that there's ways, there's strategies of, how you handle your time in prison. So many people did it differently. Like, I know there's hard days in prison. Paul, how did you handle like a hard day in prison? What did you do to kind of keep yourself afloat?
Well, I had a difficult case manager, and he was all about making your life difficult, and he wanted to kind of really, put his thumb down on you. And that was hard. But I think the thing that was great about being in Leavenworth was my family was less than 20 miles away, about maybe 25 miles away. So there was not a single visitation time on Saturday, Sunday, or Monday that I didn't either see one of my members of my family, all of my members, or even friends and stuff that I know, and colleagues and so forth. And so those visits would catapult me through the rest of the week.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a Christian, so I got involved in the chapel a lot, and tried to serve as much as I could there. But I can't stress and just as you said at the beginning of the podcast, I saw your family there as much as mine, and they came from St. Louis, right?
Right.
So that was amazing, and I mean, it just would catapult you to the next visit.
And I think that's such a great way of saying that too, Paul. Is that my time and your time really we lived week to week so that we could see them again, and that fueled us up. And it's almost like you got to straddle the fence a little bit from the outside world to the prison world so that you could stay connected enough that you weren't so far removed from what was going on in that world. That was the thing I saw from a couple of the guys that I was friends with that didn't have that. And they struggled with being so far away from that feeling of freedom or that feeling of a touch of a family member or a friend. And man, I think that makes, I always have a tremendous amount of gratitude for the fact I didn't have to go through time like that, because I think that time would take on such a different dimension if you were just doing the time on your own.
I agree with that. It helped that our families or our friends or whatever would visit, and it would, as I use the word, it would catapult you through the rest of the week. And so no matter how hard a day you had, you were able to deal with it because hey, I'm going to see my family again in a couple of days.
Yep.
So that's important. And you're right. It was very sad that you and I witnessed those who either lost their families or their families refused to come see them, or because I don't know about you, but I knew people who never ever got a visit, not once. And I can't imagine how hard that is.
Yeah, and I almost think if you looked at it, there was probably, when I first got there, I think there was like 400 and some odd people. It was really overcrowded, and they've had people on cots and everything, but it got less people as we went along. But maybe 30, 35 people got visits out of that whole population of people. And that it was a small percentage. Small percentage.
Well, I know I certainly counted a blessing that I got to see my family as much as I did.
Yeah. So, Paul, you get into this thing. You've got how much time did you serve at Leavenworth? So you were there 14 months in Duluth. So you had how many years left when you got to the Leavenworth?
I think I had 3.5 years left.
Okay.
With your good time, I think my sentence ended after 62 months.
Yeah, because I think it's like 84% of your time or something like that.
Correct.
Federal.
And so I was there about 3.5 years total in all. And, I always tell people I wouldn't like to go back, but it is a great learning experience for you. You learn a lot about yourself.
Yeah.
You learn a lot about other people. And what you do is come to have a great respect for the things that you need to change or decide or, try and think about in your own way.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I think when and I heard somebody say this not too long ago, but your world in prison is like being in black and white. And then when you get out, it turns back to color. Cause it's just, you're getting through that time. You're taking it a day at a time. You can't look too far ahead because that's claustrophobic and overwhelming. But if you can eat it a day and a week, you can get through it. And
sure, very much so.
And it's funny how inmates, they chop up their time. Well, I made it through another spring, or this is my last Christmas, or whatever that is. It's how you adapt and survive. And the other thing, probably that was different. You didn't have air conditioning at Leavenworth.
No, that's true. You didn't. And it got a little warm sometimes. But that was, you were asking earlier, and I'm sorry I forgot to bring this up about how you got through certain days.
Yeah.
As you know, almost everyone walked.
Yes.
Everyone would walk. I mean, they were out there on the track or something like that walking. And
for miles.
Miles. And I remember there was a time when I was doing 4 to 5 miles a day.
Yeah.
Now I'd be lucky to do 400 or 500 feet. But you didn't think about it then because it was just something you did, and it kept you both good health wise, and it also kept you focused to where you think we're not thinking about how bad the day was.
Yeah, and I think
but everybody I knew walked.
Oh yeah, and it felt so much better to be outside of that building than to be inside that building. That building to me was so claustrophobic because, there wasn't much in that building. You had your A block, your B block, your C block, your D block, and you had that cafeteria in the middle, and you had the gymnasium on one side, the commissary on the other. That was it. That's it.
That's the whole camp, yeah.
Little rundown schoolhouse.
Yeah.
So tell me, Paul, so you're getting close to the door, 6 months to the door, being free. What did you start thinking, and what's going on in your mind?
Well, as I said earlier, I had a real difficult case manager, and of course he was going to do all he could to keep me there. And if you recall, we were going through a time whenever they had closed a number of halfway houses. Mm-hmm. So the way they remedied that was they were just extending a lot of the people's
time. Yeah.
And I was very, very concerned because I had gotten a date of February 28th, 2018. And I was so looking forward to it. And about December, 1st of December, my case manager called me and says, well, you've now become a victim of the closed halfway houses. We can't send you to a halfway house until May. And I just, it just took all the wind out of me. I was so devastated. And I said, well, is there some way to, I lived here in Kansas City. Can I just do home confinement? I said, we don't do home confinement here. confinement.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just devastated. So my family, my daughter and my wife happened to visit me that weekend, and they were livid about it, you know, because they were so looking for me to come home. And I said, it's nothing I can do. That, you know, this is the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and the rules they make are incontrovertible.
Mm-hmm.
And but anyway, a strange story. They got very angry about this, and so they both of them. My daughter lives in Hawaii, and my wife here in Kansas City. They began contacting or calling the Federal Bureau of Prisons regional office every single day.
Wow.
And they were pushing to do this and to do that. And I mean, every day they would do 2 or 3 calls, you know, and so forth like that. And
Good for them. Good for them.
I guess the regional office finally got tired of them calling. And so one day my daughter called and we got a hold of the regional director. And she said, well, I've been looking at your father's file here, and he's pretty boring. He doesn't really.
He's a boring prisoner.
Yeah, and she said, "Well, no." Says, "Well, we have a new program, or it's not a new program, but it's a program that exists that he would fit under." And Brent, I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of it now, but it basically meant that you were such a high level person of not getting in trouble that they were going to just bypass anything and send you straight home. And she said, I think he'll qualify for that.
Wow.
And so anyway, one thing led to another, and they said, we're going to let you out on the 28th, and your wife can pick you up at 9 a.m., and you just go straight on home. So I didn't go to a halfway house, and it was really quite nice because I don't know, you know, I understand. I haven't been to a halfway house, but I understand sometimes they can be rather depressing too.
Oh gosh, the one that was in St. Louis, which they've now closed down here this last year. I think it was worse than anything that was at Leavenworth. Just the filth and the
that's what
violence.
I've been told.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate. I cannot tell you how happy I was. And when I went in to see the
I can't imagine, Paul, because I mean, you thought you were going to do all this extra time, and all of a sudden they just say, "Here you are."
Yeah. Well, the case manager, when I went in, I thought, he's going to be very angry because he won't see me stay another.
Yeah.
He said, "Yeah, you're on this blah 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 program," and I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "You're very lucky. You're only the second person I've seen in 18 years get on that program." And I said, "Well, I'm glad I won."
and he didn't have anything to do with it.
There's nothing he could do about it, right? He was pretty well stuck with it. And so that's how it went. To me, it was a very uplifting time because I went through, I thought, defeat, and then I got picked up again to make you feel like, hey, there is some justice here.
Oh, yeah. And the fact that your family was able to make something move in that system is almost unreal.
I'm sure the regional office was very tired of hearing that.
Warmed down.
Sure. Yeah.
So you get out. Who's there to get you when you get out?
My wife picked me up. My youngest son, who at that time was a junior at the University of Oklahoma, drove up the night before. He was there. My other son, Paul Jr., who's a captain in the United States Army, was on base, but he was FaceTiming.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if you remember, Brent, but whenever I went in, FaceTime didn't exist, or it didn't exist the way it does then.
No.
And then my daughter was FaceTiming from Hawaii.
Yeah.
So when I got in the car and they showed me these 2 phones, and I said, because I thought they had just recorded that the night before. I realized it was real.
It's live.
Yeah, so I had to understand that, they're talking. You can talk to them right now. I said, I had no idea you could do that. So they picked me up. We drove straight home. It was unlike anything. And I don't know if you had this situation, but driving home, it seemed the car was going so fast.
Isn't that funny how that happens?
Yeah.
It feels like everything's moving so fast.
Everything is moving so fast, and I thought, wow, we're going so fast, and they were going maybe 55 or 60.
Right.
But I thought that was an interesting thing, and I think it's because we've been put away so long that we
not used to moving that fast.
Yeah, a regimented way we do things.
Yeah.
That's the way it happens.
I had the same phenomenon. It was really strange.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, this is really strange, but it was a very happy day.
Yes. So, Paul, tell me what now? What's the world going on now in Paul's world?
I'm retired now. I play a lot of golf, but one of the things that I did, I don't know if you heard about it, but I was very concerned before I left prison about inmates I would meet, and they would have absolutely no contact. Just like we said, they'd have no family, no friends. They had no way to go to the commissary and get just basic needs. As you know, everything costs. You go to do email, it costs. You do a phone, it costs, everything. And I was very concerned about that. So when I was released, my wife and I started a ministry. We call it, or it's called Hartfield Missions. Mm-hmm. And if any of your people want to check it out, it's www.hartfieldmissions.com. And what we do is we support financially inmates who are struggling inside the prison system, or inmates who have gotten out or trying to get started. Because as you know, some people walk out and they have nothing,
right?
Nothing to go to. And we raise money to give to these individuals. We try and pick those that we feel like are struggling, because some people, as you know, in prison make more money than
they get prison rich.
That some of us do outside of prison.
Right.
And so we've been in that ministry now since I've gotten out. We tell people who donate to us, we are a nonprofit. We tell people who donate to us that 100% of your donation goes to help an inmate or an inmate's family. We don't take anything for salary or expenses or anything like that. And so that's been kind of something that we've worked on since I've been free, because when you're retired, you have the time to do it. And in fact, I just got a call from from an inmate who's released now that we helped financially, and we're trying to help him get his car going so he can now get to his job. And that's kind of what we've been doing here.
I love it, Paul. I just love that. I mean, because that is something that affects somebody immediately. And by you being an ex-inmate, you know how important that is. And the fact that you're not only doing it while they're in prison, but helping them when they're out of prison, because like you said, there's some guys that get out and they have nothing, and then they have to find a job. They have to find a place to live, and all those things are tough interviews, tough places. You know, there's boxes you have to check, and if you check the box, they say no, then you're homeless or you don't have a job. So right. I just think that's fantastic you're doing that. I commend you.
Thank you so much. It's a passion that my wife and I have. A friend of both mine and yours, when he got out, he served like 15 years almost on a drug charge. And I called him. I said, "I'm so happy you're out and everything." And he said, "Well," says, I got these job interviews, but I don't have any clothes to wear and so forth like that. So we sent him up some cash to get him some new set of clothes and so forth, and he had the job the next time that I talked to him. So, you know, it's helping these people, because like we said at the beginning of the podcast, there are so many who just want to get back into society and rebuild their life. And it's hard, because I'm one inmate that I know is flying here to Kansas City this coming weekend. And I hadn't seen him in a long time, but he runs a Bible study that I go to on Friday mornings at 6:30 in the morning for inmates all around the country. So you see people from everywhere you can imagine. But he's coming here, and the reason I bring him up is I still remember the day when I was in Duluth, and I went to probably my second visitation. My wife had come down, and his wife had come down too. And his wife went to him and told him, says, "Well, I want you to enjoy this visit with your two children, because it's the last time you're going to see them. I believe in you, and you'll never see them again." And I thought at the time how I could have handled that, and I wouldn't have been able to. But I thought he handled it so bravely. And, you know, his two little children, one must have been 5, the other maybe 7. They were just crying away when he left, and he got down to their level, and he said, "Don't worry, Daddy will be here." And I've just been so impressed with him and everything like that. So there are inmates like that, and we try to find them out. It's hard. We do some of the inmates both in federal and in the state prisons, and we try and locate the ones who are in need and try and help them financially if we can.
Paul, it's just a big, big deal. I mean, and the thing that is so big about that is the one thing you don't ever want to take away from somebody is hope. And by doing something that you're doing, you're giving these people hope, and that's got to fill you up.
Well, it's very, I don't know if I'd say gratifying, but it's uplifting.
Yeah.
Because even when I was we didn't have a lot of money when I went away. Like I said, we stopped being a 2-income family and became a 1-income family.
Right.
And I was worried if my wife would be able to survive financially.
Yeah.
The house, all these things, the automobiles, and even myself, I would see things pop up on my commissary list, money that I didn't know about, that somebody had sent, and I was so thankful. And that's the reason toward the end, I began to meet people who were either by themselves or had lost their family or something, and they were struggling, trying just to get basic needs. And it's hard for them. Like I have one guy who's writes me incredible, beautiful letters, and he's serving 3 life sentences in a state prison in Texas, and we support him financially because he has no family. He just has his mom, and his mom's elderly and can't give him anything. And he writes such glowing letters where he says he's so thankful that there's someone like us out there that would help him. Even though, he says, I regret what put me in here. I don't know any way to change it. I'm just going to serve my time and be happy. And, but I just am so thankful that you taken me as a person to support.
I love that. I think it's fantastic. Paul, tell me about your book for such a time as this. What's this book about?
Well,
for people who want to get this.
This is it's kind of a book about my time when serving in the prison system. Believe it or not, you're in here. You won't know that, but you might if you read it. You might say, "Hey, I remember when that happened."
I recognize that guy.
Yeah, I had bad days whenever I just felt like a caged animal and said, "I got to get out of here. I can't take this anymore." And my wife sent me. She'd always send me uplifting emails to try and help me get out of it, and she sent me one day, and she says, You've done. It was shortly after the Easter program that you talked about.
Yeah.
She says, you've done so wonderfully trying to pull that together, and you've done these things. Don't give up. You can make it through this. And I was saying, no, I can't. And she quoted a verse from the Bible, and it's from a book called Esther chapter 4, verse 13. And what's happening is Esther is the queen of the Persian Empire. And one of the shaman there have decided that they've hatched a plan to where they're going to kill and destroy the entire Jewish nation. They were captured at that time. They were going to destroy the whole Jewish nation. Esther is Jewish. Nobody knew that at the time, but she was Jewish. And so her uncle come to her and said, "You've got to do something about this. You're the queen." And she says, "I can't. Because as queen, if I approach the king without him summoning me, he could have me beheaded." And her uncle said, "Well, if you don't do something, we will receive help from afar," meaning God. And then he says one last thing. He says, "And who knows but that you should come to your royal position for such a time as this." And I always think that applies to our life. Who knows that we might not be put in prison at those dates, at those times, for such a time as this, that we would talk to someone, help to someone, or lead someone in some way to help them. And so it takes through the chapters of basically what I've discussed with you today of, how I got into this mess, how I got to the prisons, how I dealt with it, some of the things that we talked about. I talk about some of the people. I don't use names, of course, but, and how I was very moved by some of the people and how they affected my life. I mean, what I discovered was, there were really nice people in prison. There were some that were difficult, but they were really people
as there is on the outside.
yeah, and so forth. So it's a book about my time, but it's basically spiritually devised from a Christian standpoint, and I think it's something that both the Christian person would enjoy, or the non-Christian, because it basically tells, here's what happened, here's how I got here, here's what God did for me, and here's how I got out of it for this point.
I like it. Nuggets of wisdom of your experience. Paul, where do you get that book?
Well, it is on Amazon. I hear that sometimes it's hard to purchase on Amazon. I don't know why, but that way it is. And I always tell people, if you want to get a copy of it, you can contact me at that at that webpage, www.hartfieldmissions.com. And my daughter runs the public relations, so she sends them out right away.
Perfect.
And we'd be glad to send them out to somebody. We started out when we first got all of them, we sold them for $15 a copy and used that to open up our ministry to help people. Now I just say, I'll give you one. And if you want to send something to help us, we'd appreciate it, but you're not required to.
Can't wait to read it. It's on its way. It's supposed to be here tomorrow, I think.
It should be there tomorrow.
Yeah. So Paul, you're such a good guy and doing good things for people. Anything you'd like to impart to the audience here on your life and what's happened? And
well, I think that's a hard thing sometimes, because I think people sometimes, and I know I was this way before I got in trouble. Whenever I heard someone was getting in trouble, my first thought would be lock them up. They need to be locked up to commit a crime. Get them out of here.
mm-hmm.
Get them off the streets.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, when I was incarcerated, and I began to meet so many different people, yourself, I can just name them. So many different people. They had different personalities, but they were in there for different things. I would say that I would impart that we should never continue to judge someone for a mistake they made, because we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
There's nobody out here who hasn't made a mistake. You and I, we may be free right now, but we are felons forever.
Yep.
That'll never change.
Sentence,
we can never own a gun. In the late 1800s, if you got sentenced to prison and you went and served your term, your slate was clean. You walked out, you were a new man.
Right.
But that's not the case. Now, I will say there's great strides that have been made in prison reform, but it still needs to go a lot farther. So if I were to impart something to your audience, I would say this: give people another chance. Give them a chance. And I think you will see that many of them are not only sorry for their mistake, but want to do everything in their power to make up for that mistake. I know I do.
Oh, I so second that, Paul. Such a good statement, because so many people are looking for second chances, and they're trying to keep the hope alive, and they're looking for opportunities and hoping that somebody will grab them and give them that opportunity to make another life for themselves.
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
Paul, just great stuff. I so appreciate you being on the show today and giving us your words of wisdom and I love what you're doing with your mission. That is right on to what should be going on, because it's going to make an impact, and it's proud of that, Paul. That's really fantastic. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Folks, for those who, speaking of books, so we've got 2 books here today. For Such a Time as This, Paul Hartfield, and you got Brent Cassidy, Nightmare Success. Get them on Amazon. You get mine also on Barnes & Noble. For those, we love the likes and subscribing. Leave a review if you got time. Those are fantastic. I love those. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Paul, thank you so much, man.
My pleasure. Thank you, Brent.
Nightmare Success, in and out.